Every year, millions of people stand in New York Harbor and look up at a giant copper statue that has watched over the city for more than 100 years. She stands tall on Liberty Island, holding her torch high, just like she did back in 1886. But there was a time when she wasn't there at all. Before the photos, before the tourists, before these photographs, it was just an idea that was born in a small room in Paris. A plan to build something huge, a gift of friendship made from iron and copper. This is the story of how the Statue of Liberty was built, step by step, piece by piece, first in France and then rebuilt again in New York Harbor. Though I truly can't step back in that time, I utilised AI to relive that history with you. It started with France, which wanted to build a monument to celebrate freedom and its friendship with the United States. The idea came from French thinker Édouard-René Lefebvre de La Boulaye, who believed the statue would honour American independence and shared democratic values. Afterwards, Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi was chosen to bring that bold vision to life as a real, towering symbol of liberty. In the spring of 1876, Bartholdi's workshop at Gadget, Gautier and Company in Paris burst into life. Workers unrolled copper sheets and began hammering them over wooden forms. Bartholdi himself hammered rivets into the first completed piece, the right arm holding the torch. A joyous procession soon carried that arm, still pointing skyward, aboard a flatboat down the Seine to the French port, then across the Atlantic to the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. At the 1876 World's Fair, visitors gasped at this colossal arm rising 27 feet into the air. Atop a balcony in the torch's flame, fairgoers of the Gilded Age even climbed to feel the very spot where Bartholdi's metalwork would one day rest. But as fireworks crackled in Philadelphia's nighttime sky, Bartholdi was already back in Paris planning the next step. By late 1876, the arm had been shipped to New York and reassembled in Madison Square Park, where it remained as a beacon encouraging Americans to pay for Liberty's base. On both sides of the ocean, fundraising committees hustled donations. When Bartholdi returned to Paris after his American trip, he threw himself into fashioning Liberty's colossal countenance. By midway through 1878, the head and upper torso were completed. That summer at the Paris World's Fair on the Champ de Mars, the nearly 30-foot copper head, complete with its crown of spikes, turned heads of Parisians and visitors alike. Beneath that massive face, Bartholdi hosted tours of the crowded workshops. Schoolchildren, aristocrats, and even skeptical doubters filed through, craning their necks to see the wooden armature and gleaming panels. Tickets to watch the work in progress were sold at cafes. Bartholdi even raffled off miniature replicas of Liberty to raise funds. By the end of 1878, the transatlantic effort had paid off enough copper and coin for Bartholdi to say proudly, "The statue is half built." The head and shoulders stood finished under a summer sun, symbolizing Liberty's future smile at the harbour. Yet even as applause rang in Paris, there were anxious voices in New York. The pedestal fund was only an iron skeleton of a plan. Americans had fallen far behind on their part of the bargain. He kept hammering sheets and convincing French donors that Liberty would indeed have her American home, come what may. In 1879, a tragedy and an innovation swept through the project. The renowned architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who had begun sketching out Liberty's inner support, fell ill and died before finishing his plans. Suddenly, Bartholdi had no blueprint for the 93-metre statue's spine. Then stepped Gustave Eiffel, who was already famous for his ironwork. Eiffel proposed an audacious solution, an inner iron pylon and framework that would allow the copper skin to sway gently in the winds of New York Harbor. I can almost picture the moment Eiffel triumphantly hammered the first rivet, declaring that his vision would stand. He taught his team to interleave iron girders and plates beneath the copper, insulating them so sea breezes or summer heat would not crack the skin. Bartholdi watched as Eiffel's workers built a lightweight iron tree that would eventually grow a green copper-clad woman. Meanwhile, on the American side, the pedestal needed a hero of its own. In late 1881, New York's committee called in America's most famous architect, Richard Morris Hunt, to draw up plans. Hunt designed a monumental stone pedestal 114 feet high, topped by terraces and Doric portals. But as soon as the drawings were unrolled, reality hit. Funds were still too short. The pedestal was cut down to 89 feet, switched from granite to concrete, and had less fanfare than first envisioned. Still, the groundwork in New York began. Barely a week after Bartholdi finished Eiffel's iron mast in Paris. men were laying the statue's bedrock foundation inside the old Fort Wood on Bedloes Island. Marble masons from Connecticut and workmen from Italy arrived to set stones and pour concrete, racing against time and tight budgets. However, by December 1881, the inner pediment framework and the statue's heart were both rising, one from concrete, one from iron. Through 1882 and 83, each country kept its own labour and trouble. The great statue was coming together, segment by segment. By early 1883, the copper skin was welded almost up to Liberty's waist. Bartholdi even toasted the milestone by lunching atop an inner platform inside the half-finished statue. Outside, Parisian rows of incomplete arms and torso sections lay about like pieces of a giant puzzle. In November 1883, Bartholdi's team lifted the completed right arm and placed it beside the workbenches, ready to merge it with the new body when all was ready. Yet the project still hung by threads in New York. The pedestal's construction had stalled repeatedly for lack of money. In 1882, when organisers held a gala auction to raise funds, they turned for help to a refugee advocate and poet, Emma Lazarus. She penned the new Colossus that year, with its immortal lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, to tug heartstrings and auction enthusiasm." Across newspapers and drawing rooms, details of Liberty's plight appeared. Schoolchildren collected pennies, immigrants in tenements scraped by, and even working men donated paychecks. Finally, in 1883, the pedestal's cornerstone was laid, but even as the granite walls climbed on Bedloes Island, time was running short. On July 4th, 1884, Eiffel's 47th birthday, Bartholdi and former Suez Canal builder Ferdinand de Lesseps signed the formal deed of donation of the Statue of Liberty to the United States. In the bright summer sun, they proclaimed her the 8th wonder of the world. Paris celebrated. Americans cheered from a safe distance, but the funds were still dragged behind. By December 1884, Bartholdi could step back and admire the finished Colossus in his yard. The copper woman stood intact for the first time, towering above the rooftops. She was still a minty brown in colour back then. On an overcast December day, he hosted a final inspection. Ambassador Morton and the committee viewed the marvel standing on scaffolding and declared it breathtaking. In spring 1885, Liberty's creators performed the most complicated act of all, taking their daughter apart. Starting in January, workmen began unbolting and crating pieces of the statue one by one. A scout might have seen copper panels lifting into the trucks under gaslight. Within weeks, the 350 individual parts of Lady Liberty were tucked into over 200 wooden crates. By April, the mason crews in New York were laying the final blocks of the pedestal. On the 17th of June 1885, the disassembled Statue of Liberty finally set sail. The French naval frigate Isère carried her across the Atlantic in triumph. Parisians waved as the ship departed. Americans awaited her arrival with bated breath. Early one morning, the Isère steamed under the statue's future neighbour, the Brooklyn Bridge, then only a few years old. Harbour whistles blew, and the statue finally reached New York. It would take nearly a year for the pedestal to be completed. Indeed, for nearly a year the statue lay idle on the seawall, crated and waiting like a gift-wrapped treasure. Rain or shine, cargo handlers kept vigil over her bundles. I imagine dock workers sitting on the crates, reading the New York World or smoking pipes, wondering when this giant lady would step out of her box. On April 18, 1885, a French foreman arrived on the island, tools in hand, to rebuild Liberty piece by piece. Slowly, like a ship being put together upside down, the statue rose again in mid-air, now on solid American ground. Railway ties held up sections until they were fixed. A mobile crane lifted the head into the socket where Bartholdi's chisel first cut her face decades earlier. On October 28, 1886, Grover Cleveland officially dedicated the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbour. The day was cold and misty, but that did not stop the celebration. Over 1 million people lined Manhattan's Battery and packed boats in the harbour, all waiting to witness history. Flags unfurled across the city. Along Broadway, paper strips fluttered down in what became New York's first ticker tape parade. Then, through fog and drizzle, Liberty appeared, towering above the water, torch lifted high. She was the tallest statue in the world. At her base, Bartholdi stood silent and emotional. The iron framework held strong. Children pointed upward in wonder. More than copper and steel, she became a symbol. It was built piece by piece and is now standing as a promise of freedom for generations to come. Thank you for coming along on this journey through history. I hope that by telling the story of Lady Liberty's history, from 1875 to 1886, I've helped you feel as if you were there, watching the statue grow. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to hear more stories from the past, of other times and other monuments, just let me know in the comments. Until then, may her torch continue to light the way for all the world's dreamers.